Hey there everyone, BradyBot here. And today I'm going to talk you through a formal process of how we go about finding the best line of play at Matchpoints. This technique can be applied to Matchpoints, imps, border match, you name it, any sort of bridge hand. But we're going to look at a particular example that I played from February's Platinum and Star Robot Individual Tournament on Bridgebase Online. So the process has 6 steps. First, we want to come up with candidate lines of play. Next, we're going to make a list of the relevant layouts that we need to consider. We want to calculate the number of tricks taken for each of these layouts. We next need to convert the data to match points. We're going to calculate the odds of each layout occurring. And finally, we compute the expected match points of each line. Now, I'm going to take you through each of these 6 steps in more detail. But first, we want to look at a particular hand, and this is the one that we're going to be analyzing today. As I said, this is from the most recent February Platinum and Stars Robot Individual Tournament on BBO. It was actually board 1 of day 1. I will link the video when I played this live in the description, so you all can go check that out and listen to my thought process as I played through the hand in real time. But a couple things to note. This was played as a declare play only event, which means that the auction is given to us and the opening lead. So we don't have to worry about certain concepts that I'm going to bring up later, such as alternative contracts, different opening leads, right-siding versus wrong-siding a contract, all of these ideas. Everyone's in 3-no trump in the South. Everyone has had the exact same auction. Everyone gets the 10 of hearts lead to East King. So what are some lines of play? That is step 1. We want to come up with some different lines of play that we're going to analyze to see which one is best. Well, when I was playing the hand live, I came up with 3 possible lines of play. And so those are the 3 that we're going to focus on today. The first line of play I want to look at is what happens if we duck 2 rounds of hearts, win the 3rd heart, and then start playing on diamonds. The second line of play that we're going to look at is crossing to dummy in a black suit, taking a spade finesse, and planning to cash out as many black tricks as we can before giving up the lead to the opponents. The third line of play is going to be to immediately win the ace of hearts without ducking 2 rounds and then go after diamonds. So if you want to pause and think about how you would go about the hand, for those of you who have already watched my video on day 1 of the Platinum and Stars tournament, you'll know what I ended up doing. But this is a good opportunity for us to actually analyze and see if I did the right thing. And for those who haven't seen that video, I think it is worthwhile to try and consider which one of these 3 lines of play you like best and what you would do at the table. So, just to reiterate, these are the 3 possible lines of play that we're considering. We duck 2 rounds of hearts, then set up diamonds. Line 2, we win the 1st heart, play a spade to the ace, spade to the jack, try and cash out the black suits. There is something to be considered on the second line of play. For example, if the spade finesse loses, we don't really know what West is going to do if they win the queen of spades. Our jack of hearts is protected, but maybe West can cross to their partner in diamonds to put a heart through. Maybe West will mistakenly cash the queen of hearts, setting up our jack. There are some options. We'll get to some of the assumptions we make about the opponent's defense a bit later. And then line 3, we're going to win the 1st heart and set up the diamond suit. I do want to bring up a small point about line 2, that there could be alternative options other than crossing to the ace of spades. Like, in isolation, playing the spade suit for 4 tricks, it's definitely best to cross in clubs and lead a spade to the jack. This will pick up Queen Doubleton with East, as we can later finesse West for the 10. After spade to the Jack, King of Spades, we then can play a spade to the 9. Because this is kind of an obscure point, we're going to ignore this in our calculations, but this might be a small improvement on the line of play listed. Next, we want to make a list of all the relevant layouts of the opposing cards. Well, because one of our lines of play involves ducking 2 hearts, and this helps when the heart suit is 5-3, we have to consider the possibility of 4-4 hearts or 5-3 hearts. And again, a simplifying assumption here, we're going to ignore the possibility that hearts are 6-2 or 7-1, for example, because these layouts are a little unlikely, both on the auction, where neither opponent bid hearts, and because just a priori, a 6-2 heart split is very low percentage. We also care about the positions of spade, queen, and diamond ace in all of our layouts, so we have to consider the possibility of either defender holding those cards. And one of our candidate lines actually attempts to cash out spades, which means we do care how the spades split. If spades are 3-3 with the queen on side, that means we get 4 tricks. If spades are 4-2 with the queen on side, we only have 3 spade tricks. Finally, we might actually care about how diamonds split, since we're attempting to set up the diamond suit in some lines. But for now, let's ignore this, and we'll come back to it later if it becomes relevant. So, step 3, we want to calculate the number of tricks taken for each layout. And I've kind of alluded to this a little bit, that sometimes this is difficult because we don't know how the opponents are going to defend. But a very simple assumption to make is that the opponents are going to defend double dummy. This can depend a lot on the quality of the opponents and the quality of the field, right? If we were playing in a national championship, this assumption might be very close to accurate, because with good signaling, and especially after a few tricks have passed, the opponents might very well be double dummy on defense. But in a very weak field, they might elect to just cash a bunch of aces and kings, setting up tricks for us. So I think the simple assumption of presuming the opponents will play double dummy often works out for us, and so that's what we're going to go with in our analysis today. On this particular hand, really the only thing that we need to worry about in this case is what happens if West wins a spade after we take a spade finesse. So, making the double dummy assumption, we'll assume that West will always cross to East's ace of diamonds to get a heart through if possible, and otherwise is going to exit passively in a black suit to not set up any extra tricks for us. A question you might be wondering is, well, what happens if clubs split badly? None of our lines of play really cared about the club split, so all of them take the same number of club tricks. Whether that's 4 or 5, we don't really know. But we're just going to make the assumption that clubs split 4-2 or better, because that will simplify our calculations. So taking all that into consideration, we put all of our values into a table like this. And there's a lot of shorthand here, so I will quickly step through the notation. When it says heart 4-4 at the top or heart 5-3, that is that suit splitting 4-4 or 5-3. Similarly for the spade 3-3 or spade 4-2 at the bottom. And then diamond ace W or diamond ace E is just East or West holding the ace of diamonds. So there are 4 possibilities. There's kind of a binary choice of each possibility, which leads us to 16 possible layouts of the cards. And we've listed how many tricks are being taken for each line of play, lines of play 1, 2, and 3, in each of the rows for that specific layout. The numbers in black tend to be that number is mostly set in stone, especially if we make our double dummy assumptions about how the defense is going to go upon winning a spade finesse, for example. The numbers in red are a little less certain. For example, line of play number 3, we said that it could matter whether or not diamonds split. And these red number 11s at the bottom of the table those kind of indicate that, yeah, if diamonds are not breaking, then maybe we only get 10 tricks in those specific instances when the queen of spades is offside. But there might still be a squeeze against some opponent, and also there's some small possibility of missed defense if they don't know exactly what our shape is on the auction. So for a lot of reasons, I think 11 is the right number to put in those locations. The 9s that are in red for line of play number 2, again, kind of dependent on how West elects to defend with that specific layout of the cards. It's very possible that West ends up cashing the ace of diamonds or something, or leading a diamond away from the ace, hoping to get their partner in, and this will let us actually score an extra trick. But if we play off of the double dummy assumptions, then 9 tricks seems to be the right number for those particular layouts. And now it's important to convert the data into match points. Well, why do we want to do this? It's because just taking an expected value over the scores that we get for these particular layouts is not going to give us the right number of match points that we're expected to win. And this is a hard concept for a lot of bridge players to understand, because sometimes it's difficult to convert from just, hey, I think I'm going to take about 10 tricks on this hand, to, oh, that's going to equate to earning 2.5 match points on the board. But we can do this, given the table that we had, as long as we make another assumption of how likely the field is going to be to take each line of play. This can easily depend on our judgment of the quality of players in the field. Certain lines of play might be appealing to weaker players, whereas a different line of play might be appealing to stronger players. Especially if you can't really do all of these calculations, like what we have just done in terms of building a giant table or spreadsheet with 48 different entries in your head while you're playing the game. And most people can't. I mean, I can't. So a simple assumption here that we often use is that if we've come up with 3 different candidate lines of play, then 1/3 of the field will pick line 1, 1/3 will pick line 2, 1/3 will pick line 3, right? So that will make our analysis a little bit easier. In general, this division doesn't matter so much. It might matter if one line of play is substantially better or worse than other lines, where if we're getting, for 3 candidate lines, one of them being chosen 75% or more, then this could have a real impact. But if all of the lines are being chosen by some percentage of the players, then how you divide it up is only going to matter a little bit. So once we do all of that, we convert the table into something that looks like this. These are match points now, rather than number of tricks being taken. And you'll notice that a bunch of the red numbers went away, and that's because even if we adjusted the number of tricks, other than some very rare circumstances, the match points did not change for these layouts. So really only the very first layout that we mentioned, hearts 4-4, West having both the ace of diamonds and queen of spades, and spades 3-3, there's some possibility that line of play number 2 would take more than half a match point. But for the most part, this is what the table looks like. So now how do we go about calculating the odds of one of the layouts? Well, we take into consideration the a priori odds of all of the relevant pieces of the layout. So hearts 4-4, this will happen 33% of the time. Diamond ace with West, 50% of the time. Spade queen with West, 50% of the time. Spades 3-3, 36% of the time. Now, how did I come up with these percentages? Well, the 50-50 percentage you can probably work out yourself. There are tables you can look up if you're not familiar with the odds of suits splitting a certain way from an a priori perspective. I wouldn't worry too much about memorizing some of these things, but for some of the more common ones, like a 3-3 division, or a 3-2 split, or even a 4-3 split, those are useful to know because you can make quick judgments at the table about whether one line of play is a little bit more likely than another by just kind of combining the percentages in the way that we'll be talking about in a second. And so how do we combine the percentages for one specific layout? Well, again, a simplifying assumption that we can make is that these probabilities are independent. If the diamond ace is really with west, it's slightly more likely that the spade queen is with east, just because there's 12 empty spaces now versus 13 in east hand. Similarly, if hearts are 4-4, it's now actually much more likely that spades are 3-3 because now there's only 9 cards missing between both hands as opposed to 13. But for the most part, if we just make this independence assumption and the probabilities, we can very easily compute the odds of one layout, and we will be a little bit off mathematically, but it's not going to cause it's not going to be a huge difference in the overall calculation. So how do we do it for independent probabilities? We just multiply all these together. 33% times 50% times 50% times 36% is approximately 3%. And we want to do this for each one of the layouts in our table. That eventually gets us a table that looks like this. So the very first layout has a 3% chance. We just calculated that. The second layout in our table has a 4.5% chance, and so on and so forth. If you sum up the probabilities at the top, we actually only get 70%, which is why we're probably going to want to normalize our data. This isn't strictly necessary because ultimately we just care which line of play is better than which other line of play. But if we want to get a true value for our match point expectation of each line of play, normalizing is important. So we do this, we multiply every percentage by about 10/7, and eventually get this for our table. Finally, we want to compute the expected match points of each line of play. Line 1, we take the percentage chance of the first layout, normalized, times the number of match points, plus the percentage chance of the second layout, normalized, times the second match points, and so on for all 16 layouts, and we get 0.875. We do the same thing for lines 2 and 3. Line 2, we get 0.747. And line 3 gives us a whopping 1.38, which means line 3 is by far the clear favorite at match points. So now that we've gone through the calculation, we worked it out for this one hand in particular, I'm going to cover a couple of these additional topics that you might have to worry about if you're playing in a live game and not one of these online robot tournaments, which is declare play only. First off, are there alternative contracts? You could easily imagine a hand. Let's say you open a spade, your partner bids a no trump, you bid 2 diamonds, and your partner bids 2 spades, and everyone passes, and after the opening lead, you see your partner has a 2, 3, 4, 4, 10 count. Well, some people would have this same auction, right? Make the false preference to 2 spades. Some players might rebid 2 no trump with the 10 high card points. Some players might rebid 3 diamonds, raising partner's diamond suit. And so how do you go about doing this calculation if there are alternative contracts? Well, you can incorporate this into the table by adding 1 row for every possible line of play for each alternative contract. You can imagine that this gets very messy very quickly if there are multiple lines of play and multiple alternative contracts. And again, if you're able to do this, one of the simplifying assumptions you probably want to make is that the field is split pretty evenly across each alternative contract. But in reality, that doesn't happen to be the case. Usually, it's very skewed towards one contract over all of the others. And oftentimes you can tell. For example, in this particular case, I might imagine that the field will tend to play in 3 diamonds, right? But this takes some experience and just some good guesswork on your part to figure out which one is most likely, but that has been my experience. Another thing you want to consider is how would things be different on different leads? You know, for example, what if they had led a different suit, right? Maybe at a different table, they would have led a spade against us in this contract. And so the heart lead put us in a bit of a precarious spot, whereas the spade lead would instantly give us the spade finesse, and then we could go about our business as usual, setting up the diamond suit, for example. Also, what would happen if your partner was declaring? And this is something I think a lot of people fail to consider. Most of the time, players in the field are going to be playing a pretty similar system. So if you're playing a strong no trump and you have like a 15 count, you open a no trump, partner transfers you to hearts, and you get to 4 hearts, fine. 90 to 95% of the field will be playing in 4 hearts from your side. But there could easily be a pair playing some sort of relay precision or some alternative like that, where the hearts are being declared from the other side. So you do want to take a minute to just pause and think, well, what if partner was declaring this hand? And finally, something we always want to be doing, use some bridge logic to help guide our plan. As an example, if one of the layouts that you're considering could be mathematically possible, such as an opponent having a 7-card major, but they never bid in the auction, do you really think that that's something worth considering? Probably not. So you might be able to rule out some layouts of the cards which are impossible just due to bridge logic, like someone can't have 12 high card points and be a passed hand in first seat. And then finally the question of, well, is this something I can really do at the table? No, absolutely not. There's no chance that you can pull this off at the table. Not for a hand like this one, and many bridge hands are even more complicated than the one we just looked at. Expert players use a lot of these simplifying assumptions. We've kind of talked a lot about assuming things to be equal probability throughout, and so another assumption we can make is that all layouts are equally likely. So we came up with 16 different layouts. If we just presume that percentage-wise they all happen an equal amount of the time, 1/16th chance, then that might help our calculations a bit. But realistically, there are 2 things that experts tend to do, and they kind of go hand in hand. If one particular line of play seems to be like a clear favorite in some number of the layouts, that one is probably correct. You're going to be earning full marks against every other line of play for those specific layouts. And then if you can just muster up like 2nd place in a few of the others, or a tie with some of the other lines of play, you'll probably be coming out ahead in expectation. And finally, lines of play which offer the largest maximum number of tricks tend to be best. This, I think, stems from the possibility of considering alternative opening leads, alternative contracts. If you're really contracting for the largest possible number of tricks that you could ever take on the hand, you'll be beating out people who end up in alternative spots quite often. So everyone probably wondering, if you don't recall the hand or haven't seen it before, this was the full layout. Hearts were 5-3, East had both the ace of diamonds and queen of spades, and spades were 4-2. So this meant that line 1 ends up taking 10 tricks, line 2 only takes 9 tricks, and line 3, the one that was clearly superior from our match point calculations, only takes 8 tricks. I was a little surprised that the field in this event, it's supposed to be a very, very strong field, only 25% of the field came up with the right line of play, which is what I did, which was to take line 3 and we earned a miserable 11% of the match points for our efforts on the sand. But that's going to wrap up the video for today, so I hope everyone enjoyed and got something out of the lesson. And make sure that you like the video if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I will see you later.